Hockey World. We are here at the HockeyBuzzcast on HockeyBuzz.com. The podcast that comes every Monday through Friday. Coming to Hockey World, but I'll talk about that after after Russ. I was just talking to a friend of mine named Brett right before this. After Russ Cohen, the great Russ Cohen, has something to say.
Yeah, so let's I want to talk about boxing for a minute, or I'm going to put in air quotes boxing, because Jake Paul is going to fight a guy named Nate Diaz. Now, Jake Paul just lost his last fight. He's a social media influencer. He's really not a fighter. We've talked about him once before because I think it takes, half a lifetime to learn how to box. Most athletes, when they've tried to box, and he's not an athlete, but I'm just saying, when they end their athletic career, they try and box. They're not very good. There's a reason. There's a science behind it. So now he's going to fight a guy who's 37 years old, who happens to not be in MMA anymore. He's a free agent, but he's not a boxer either. So like in the old days, they'd have called him a tomato can. And it's just like, I don't know why anybody would give money for these gimmick fights, because they're not even real boxing matches. I feel bad because I got to see some of the greatest boxers ever in my lifetime, and especially growing up. Like in the 70s, it was unbelievable. But it was really good all through the 90s too. But it's at a point now where it's almost like professional wrestling, and it's just
Well, you've seen you've seen the social, like there's like YouTubers and stuff like that fighting each other. Yeah, these big, been for huge amounts of money.
Go do it in your friend's backyard with 5 people watching. Who cares?
How much money do you think we'd raise if I was to say fight Greg Wyszynski? Just like out of hell of it, just like me and Greg toe to toe.
$1,000.
Think I could make $1,000 out of that? Because I could use $1,000, Rich. Think I could do that?
I think you're selling the Eklund short. I think there are a lot of people that would pay
$5,000.
See that?
To see Greg and I just box.
See, Joe,
I would go $5,000. I mean, I would back you.
Let's all admit that I could take Greg.
Not only would I back you, I would be your manager. I would back you and be your manager.
How would you recommend I fight?
I
would say no. I actually don't. I would just say don't fight. Personally,
I don't want to fight, but I could use my. We're in college, Joe, and another one is going to be there soon. I can.
You guys are primarily in the same weight class, aren't you? More or less.
To be fair, X a little bigger than Greg, but
I am bigger than Greg. And I think that I'm not just like bigger. Like I'm probably
the only way I am watching a fight involving Jake Paul is if he's fighting a real boxer who will kick the crap out of him. I don't like these like TikTok, YouTube stars that think they're real athletes and they're fighting like tomato cans, like you said, Russ, like Nate Robinson, the former NBA guard who Jake Paul kicked the crap out of. It's like, where is their entertainment in this? I don't get it.
I'm more offended that he doesn't wear a GoPro during these fights. I mean, what the hell is he doing? He's a YouTube guy. He's not wearing a GoPro, getting fights. Come on. Wasted opportunity.
I gotta wonder too if a quality liberal like Russ can use the term tomato can like that's. It seems a little insulting for a liberal.
Kevin, I tried to go past it.
Yeah,
it is what it is.
I certainly respect you as a liberal, but it was shocking coming out here.
I respect him as a liberal. I respect him, but not as a liberal.
I'm calling out right now.
I forgive you for your political views. That's how I.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Greg wants to fight me.
He's on.
I'll split the money for our kids' college funds. All right, let's do it.
Well, we could have seen a Rick Bonas versus Dean Evison fight last night.
We'll talk about that.
Yeah,
on the hot.
It was almost like, you remember, was it Glenn Sonmore and Jacques Demers in a Detroit, Minnesota game?
John Tortorella bumped. Who did he bump walking in the hallway the wrong way?
Brian McGrattan.
Yeah.
No bad idea that was.
That was a bad idea.
One of the aspects of our business that really bugs me, and I don't know why, but I feel like Mike DeGello on this one. But it bugs me is that how often we have to, and I'm going to use this, put up with the, no one gave us any respect. Everyone wrote us off.
Right.
Or all the people who get somewhere, like, it seems like in the whole world, nobody has ever had anybody supporting them for any reason whatsoever. Like, no matter what profession there's always someone. So, people told me I couldn't do it. Who are all these people that are?
If you did, Kev, you wouldn't be able to shock the world then, and that's the whole.
Yeah, I know. But I mean, I just saw yesterday, like the theme after the Jets won was nobody believed in us. They tried to write us off, and here we are. You know, where you are is the last playoff.
And you're back.
I wrote them off because they choked away their entire lead. That's
right.
Why I wrote them off. Like, come on,
Joe's right. Joe, yeah.
They invited the Preds and Flames back into the fight. Like, come on.
Yeah,
they did. They really did. I mean, they played horrible for a good 80% of the middle season.
It was just disingenuous. Like, I mean, they started out like an elite team in the league, and then they went in January and they lost like 9 out of 11 or whatever it was, 10 out of 12. And then everybody said, well, maybe they weren't as good. That's all that happened.
But a lot of times they'll throw it on the media like, well, you guys didn't believe in us or whatever. And it's like, the media has to report on all these horrible games. After a while, it's kind of hard to believe in it.
Yeah.
My favorite nobody believed in us one was, I think it was after one of the Patriots Super Bowl wins. And like, nobody believed in us. I'm like, get out of here. Nobody wanted you to win. It's a different thing. Nobody wants you to win. It's different than nobody believing in you.
We all believe in you.
Nobody believed in the Buffalo Bills, and they shouldn't because they never.
Right. 1 second. I'll be right there. Hold on.
Okay. Should we start the show, Act?
No. Wait 1 second.
Okay.
He's not ready.
He's not ready. Russ, how about is it 11-0 now? Tampa.
Yes, Tampa is 11-0, and
when did they play a Major League Baseball team?
Yeah, but it doesn't matter.
Oh man, they're a good team, Joe.
It doesn't even matter, even if they weren't. But they are a good team. But if you start off a Major League season 11-0, 12-0, 13-0, something like that, you have probably an 85% chance or better to make the playoffs at that point.
Well, what was the record?
Oh man, there's a lot of teams I remember starting off super hot like that, and then
not undefeated.
That Tigers in '84 team, Kev, they started
45-5. I covered
35-5, and then they just coasted to the.
I actually bought a Detroit Tigers hat that year.
Yeah, well, I mean, coasting was the right word for that because it was like they were in a wagon going downhill. Everybody climbed aboard and they just coasted in. So,
all right,
they're a great team. But I've seen that Tampa Bay team, and I agree with Joe's assessment. They haven't played teams that were, playing at a high level, but it doesn't matter who you're playing. The amount of runs they're scoring, and they're so good in every aspect. Like their pitching is.
And Shane McClanahan is a Cy Young, a legitimate.
Yeah, and their defense is good, and Franco's a rising star, and everybody they bring up to replace guys that they moved out because they didn't want to pay them, they're good.
I mean, I'll give you one little bit of analysis. One thing they're doing that a lot of other teams – sorry, Joe. The one thing they're doing that a lot of other teams aren't is they have figured out the pitch clock before anybody else, and all of their pitchers pitch at the right pace, and they don't get tired out. And that has benefited them greatly. So I give their coaching staff tremendous marks.
Well, yeah, Russ, they all came up out of AAA last year because they keep recycling everybody. Of course they're ready.
Right, but however, it's a benefit.
Sure.
Everybody's got a AAA team. They could have checked with that manager on how to do it.
I'm just excited to see when they raise their banner for their hot start. That's all.
Listen, we're all raising, okay?
Hello,
although it's been 13 years for the Yankees, pipe down.
Just for a moment, playoffs. Come on,
just for a moment, like
we made the playoffs. Raise a banner.
Just for a moment or a brief second, Joe sounded like Mike Agello. Did you catch that?
I've been working on my impressions, Kevin. I'm glad.
Yeah. Just for a second.
We make t-shirts. At least I'm happier than Mike. All right, here we go. Ready?
Yes.
Didn't we do this already?
No, I'm trying to. Hello, Hockey World. It is Wednesday, April 12th, 2023.
I'm Michael Agello, and sometimes sounding like Michael Agello and feeling like Michael Agello is a great thing.
I'm Joe Yurden from Noted Hockey and Bleacher Report. I'm not Michael Agello, even though I sometimes play him on the internet.
Russ Cohen from Sportsology.
Kevin Allen, I'm not quite sure who I am today.
Anna Mecklen. I've known Mike longer than all of you put together. You're watching HockeyBuzzcast on HockeyBuzz.com. This is the podcast that comes here Monday through Friday to figure out the comings and goings in the hockey world. And we have a couple teams going, Joe. But we're gonna. I watched that game last night. But I think before we go there, we have to talk about one of the craziest things that has happened in a long time, and that is that Penguins-Hawks game last night.
Thank you.
Which is just absolutely one of those moments like that just baffles the mind. Like that you could be in Pittsburgh at home and lose pretty handily. Like they weren't even in the game they really weren't. To a team that is going nowhere at all and jeopardize your entire playoff run. And I mean, of course, the happiest people in the world, the Florida Panthers, sitting there watching that, they're like, "There's no way in the world they thought that was going to happen."
And the Islanders, who they let off the hook after blowing that game against Washington. I mean,
right.
If you get stoned by Peter Mrazek, you deserve to miss the playoffs.
The one thing I would say about that is after the last Red Wing game, and we were all sitting around, the writers were talking about, and almost everybody there said, I'm less than convinced that the Penguins are going to beat the Blackhawks, because the one thing we've all noted about the Blackhawks is they've just been far more competitive than they had a right to be.
Yeah.
And everybody's talked about that all season long.
Yeah.
And, I know Mark Lazarus wrote a great column where he talked about, one of the problems that Davidson had as a general manager is his strength is he identifies players who are better than people think they are. And that has worked against him. He said, you look at Chicago's roster and, you're going, well, like, what's that? Is that even an NHL team? But Lazarus, who watched them all season, said, when you watch them play every day, you think, man, those guys are pretty good. Yeah. And we all felt like Chicago, not Columbus, but Chicago was the team that was going to rise up and beat the Penguins. And also, I mean, we all know the Penguins have just been a bad hockey team for a long time.
Go up and down.
Yeah. So I'm just wasn't surprised by that whatsoever. I mean, normally you would be, but the circumstances of Chicago all season long, how poor Pittsburgh has been, like I wasn't the least bit surprised.
Yeah, I mean, I was, but at the same time, what I've always said, when everybody picks something to happen that's going to happen, like the Penguins are going to win those last two games against Chicago, Montreal, no question about it. Whenever they pick those things, it never happen.
Joe, they should win those games, but the fact that they don't win those games is a commentary on that team. And we saw Pittsburgh re-sign Malkin, re-sign Letang, trade for Raquel, all these things that were sort of aimed at them being competitive and keeping that group together. But the defense was a problem. They traded for Petrie. I don't think that's really worked that well. And the goaltending was the same with Jari and DeSmith. And if they miss the playoffs by a point or two, you have to point to Jari getting hurt or Jari not playing well and their goaltending, and they've never addressed it.
No, and the Jari thing is really what submarined a lot of this. And this is where a lot of the criticism of Ron Hextall comes into play, because you had to know that you can't trust Jari. You got to find something else that works. And I know you want to be loyal to your guys, and DeSmith was, one of their guys, and they stuck with him. But like, they didn't do anything in the offseason to address goaltending, because they're thinking like, wow, it's fine. We're going to ride Jari out. Like, okay, but the rest of this team looks like a mess. And you handed out some really weird contracts, because Jeff Carter is every bit of 38 years old. Like all these guys that they're like, they still got it, but they're old. They're going to wear down. And
I think some of it did have to do with ownership, though. We've talked about it. I mean, there's no question ownership wanted to keep the playoff revenue coming if they could. But the other thing is, if you're going to rip Ron Hextall like this, when does Mike Sullivan become culpable in any way? Like nobody's saying anything about Mike Sullivan. He's still behind the bench dropping these games too.
Yeah, if you're going to trade for a $5 million player at the deadline, it shouldn't be Michael Granlund, who's a good player, don't get me wrong. It should have been for a goaltender. Now, if they can't get a Korpisalo done because Columbus won't trade with a team in their own division, fine. But there were other goaltenders that were available, and they could have upgraded, and they decided not to. And I think in the end, that's going to kill them, or that has killed them.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
they're not dead yet. It's just like
but okay.
They're not dead yet. They still get in there.
Now everybody's burning incense in Pittsburgh, praying that Samuel Montembeault or Jake Allen stone the Islanders blind so that they win that game, and then they have a chance to blow the game against Columbus.
Well, according to an outlet, the Islanders have already won. I saw that on Twitter this morning. Like they're basically talking about the Islanders win.
Was that Nostradamus who wrote that?
No, I'm telling you, the luckiest team in the world from this is the Florida Panthers, because I honestly felt like the Panthers were going to make the playoffs. And the Buzzcast was predicting it yesterday too. Like I felt like the Panthers were not going to beat Carolina because Carolina is still trying to get first in their division, and that St. Louis and that the Islanders and Penguins are going to wait out. and that would put Panther on the outside. And I really
as a kid, like the New York Jets were always the team that if they made the playoffs, they always had to back in, get some help from somebody else or whatever. So I've been used to that my whole life, and I used to hate it. I now basically am of the faith that it's just like, you know what, you get in, you get in. Who cares how you get in? I used to not like it because it sort of like was a macho thing, like I don't want my team to back in. But you know what? You back in, you back in. Who cares?
Well, of the 4 teams in the East that were chasing this, Buffalo and Florida were playing the best over the last month.
For sure.
They were the teams that, and when I watched the Buffalo game last night, Joe, I watched almost the whole game. They came out very strong. Mike was right in every bit that they played too many games and they're tired, but they came out. I mean, they were way better than the Devils in that beginning of that game. And the fact is that Devils, they're big, trying to chase Carolina. They got Luke in the lineup. There was a lot of pomp and circumstance going on. The Devils fans were chanting before the puck even dropped. It was a thing, And yet the Sabres came out flying. They made some great plays. Vanacek was really good, he just was really, really good. And, as we consider to see the Vanacek Samsonov cast away from the Capitals, just both are going to the playoffs. Both are looking great. So, I mean, when I'm watching that team last night, I'm like, this is a playoff team. They're not going to make the playoffs.
Yeah, it's tough because they had an 8-game streak pretty late in the season. There was a span where they lost 10 of 12. That hurts. They had a long losing streak back in November, I think it was.
Yeah, in November, they lost all those games in regulation, too. Like, there was a streak where they lost every game in regulation. You get a couple points there.
Yeah.
Both losing streaks, coincidentally, when Matthias Samuelsson was out of the lineup, and then he comes back, and then they start winning again.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, they played great last night for a team playing their 3rd game in 4 nights. That was an outstanding effort. And, Vanacek played great. Hats off to him there because he was great, but this is the team that I think finally got out of their own heads because they were in their heads for a lot of that 2-12 run because we were thinking they're like, oh man, playoffs are right there. We got to make the playoffs. We want this so bad. And they're young, pressure gets to you. And that was pointed at by basically everybody. You guys were psyching themselves out. Yeah. And once they got to that point where it's like, well, not making the playoffs anyways, let's just play. They rattle off a bunch of wins in a row, and you're like, oh, not out of it yet because everybody else in this race stinks too. But
let's talk about
the 2 games they lost though. They got goalied by Alex Lyon, and then they got goalied by Vitek Vanacek. It's tough.
Yeah. This is the elephant in the room though, because basically they shouldn't have played Devin Levi yesterday. They shouldn't have played him back to back, but they wanted Craig Anderson to play against his old team, the Ottawa Senators. So they moved the schedule that way for the goaltenders that way. It's not a good thing to do to a young goalie.
I think they use
that's not the case at all, Russ. That is not it. They're playing the guy that was winning them games.
That's it. Yeah, I mean, talk to people.
Luukkonen hadn't played in almost in over like a week and a half.
Yeah,
Comrie hadn't played in over 2 weeks. Levi's playing great.
Like a guy that just come out of college, and now you're going to play him back to back.
Right.
I don't think it was smart.
No, I think
it may not have been smart, but that was the right call.
Okay.
It wasn't about Anderson playing against Ottawa, though. I talked to people up there. It wasn't about that. It was about
if they were still Levi plays that game.
Yes.
Yeah.
College goalies are used to playing back to back.
They're used to playing back to back.
Yeah, but he hasn't played in the NHL much.
But here's the issue. I mean, if they're riding the hot hand with Levi, okay, fine. I think their chances of making the playoffs after a certain point were infinitesimal. But where I'm looking at is next year, Joe, and I mean, I don't think you can come back with Levi and Luukkonen. I think Luukkonen has proved that even, maybe he can be an NHL backup, but I believe he's an RFA this year and they're going to have to pay him. And I don't think that they should pay him. Anderson's going to retire. Comrie, I think, is a 4A AHL NHL goaltender making a little less than $2 million. And I don't think you can load 60 games on Levi. So again, they have to go out and get a veteran goaltender to share the load with Levi, maybe split it 40-40 and obviously improve defensively if they're going to be a playoff team next year. If they don't do that, they're going to ruin this kid.
Well, no, I look at the Bruins set the mold for him with Swayman. Swayman came in Boston and was lights out, and they're like, oh, we got our goalie now, finally. And then they're like, well, he played 10 games. We're not crowning him the starter yet. Let's go get Linus Ullmark. And they did. That worked. Defensively, I know they're going to make a play on defense. They try to get Jacob Chikrin. They're going to do something. The Chikrin attempt should have been a warning signal to the rest of the guys in the group to be like, oh, they're very serious here. That means our spot's on the line. And I think a couple of guys came up pretty short in that time since the deadline, where they were playing erratically or just not consistently enough to be able to hold it down. Because there's a couple of guys that stood out late in that run. But yeah, the off season is very important. But Kevin Adams hasn't addressed goaltending really seriously in any of his off seasons. He's going to have to now.
Yeah.
What's the wisdom with him not playing in the minors, in the AHL, trying to get to the Calder Cup, trying to get to the playoffs, trying to go on a run? Carey Price did that. That's how you do it. That's how you're supposed to do it. They're doing it backwards.
Well, listen, they're doing it the way that they have to do it. They
don't have to do it this way, Joe.
Well, they do, because they're trying to make the playoff. No, like you got to tell me Eric Comrie and Luukkonen were playing consistent enough to be able to get him to this point that we're even having this discussion.
Yeah.
No chance.
There's no way.
Chance.
No way.
That's fine. But again, you're now bringing in a kid, even though you're not saying it, you're now bringing in a kid in hopes that he's going to get you to the playoffs. That's a bad way to do it.
Every move they've made this year was done with one of the many thoughts in mind. But a key one was, we're not giving up. We're not punting on anything.
Right.
This was a move.
Well, they're giving up on his development. That's what they're doing, because
you don't know that. You think it's
rough known.
Well, but look at Carter.
Look at every goalie. Even Swayman has played 14 AHL games.
But sort of
played none, and maybe he's even going to be the starter next year. It's not the right formula.
Sort of like Pittsburgh with them going out and getting Granlund, who's a good player. The Sabres went out and got Jordan Greenway. I like him as a player. He's playing in their top six. He provides physicality, but that was not what they needed to address. Did they play meaningful games up to game 80? Yes. Is that going to help them? Yes. But they could have made the playoffs, and that's what this fan base is pissed off.
We talked about this all.
Didn't make the playoffs.
They weren't going to sacrifice top prospects to get some guy who's going.
Remember, Kevin said that they couldn't get the goalie. They tried and they couldn't get him.
No, that's true. I get that.
Yeah, I'm sort of with Russ on this, but I'm just a little bit more open-minded. I mean, he's only 21 years old, and historically, what's happened with young goalies is they come in, they play on reflexes. They don't think about what's going on. And the next year they've gotten back, they've thought about what they've accomplished, and they realize what's ahead of them. And they didn't know what they didn't know, and now they know it. Right. And so, he could come in and just not be good next season. And, you can't just put all your eggs in that basket. I'm with Russ, where you got to go out and get a veteran goalie.
Yeah. No, I
think everybody thinks that, right?
Yeah. And not
what I say too.
and certainly not a guy that you got to get a veteran goalie that you think can play a lot of games if the guy fails. Now, the problem with that, and I've talked about this many times, because this is what the theme that comes up when I've talked to general managers, there's nobody out there.
Right.
Like, he said, and last year when we were talking about a goaltender with a GM, and he said, who in the heck do you think is out there? He says, because you guys talk about there's just a goalie around every corner. And when I'm talking about it, I don't see anybody I really even like.
Well, I mean, there's according to everything that I've heard, the Sabres don't want to block Levi by going out and trading for somebody who's got long term. But, a guy like Markstrom, I think, has a couple years left in his contract, and Calgary has Vladar and Dustin Wolf as young goaltenders, and maybe they're ready to do that. We've heard Gibson. We've heard Ajari is a UFA.
How many games Wolf has played in the AHL to get to this point?
Vamelka in Arizona. So there are options. I don't know how good they are. Can't tell, but I don't know. That's up to Adams to be able to sort of weave through and find a guy that's a good fit. But I
maybe make a trade. Like, again, Calgary probably would trade you Markstrom for the next 2 years. You can make a call and see what they want. You can make a call for Carter Hart and see if the Flyers are putting him on the market for the next couple of years. Like, there's calls you can make.
Now, Carter Hart is the top prospect. Easy.
Yeah. The problem is there's so many variables out there. Who's going to be the general manager in Philadelphia? Is Treliving going to be back in Calgary? Right. Because that will be the determination if those guys get traded. Like, if I had to bet whether Markstrom will be in Calgary next year, I would bet he's for sure going to be in Calgary.
Yeah.
That's just how I feel about it now. He could be traded depending on who's going to be the general manager. But I teams are always reluctant to trade, goalies who they've had for a while. So
especially ones who have had moments where they were really good. Like, and Markstrom has had that moment. Even this year, there are times when Markstrom was really good, honestly. And Mike, thanks for putting up that quote. By the way, Mike put up the quote that said Mike was exactly right. But anyway, yeah, I mean, who knows? But the reality here is, I think, from talking to some people up there, really close to the situation this morning in Buffalo, they said that Devin Levi is just absolutely loved by his teammates. Like, they think this guy.
But I heard that about Luka.
No. I mean,
it matters if they're loved. It matters if they can stop the friggin' puck.
Well, he can stop the puck. The point is, if they play against him in practice and they know how good he is, they know the potential this guy has. They know his personality fits beautifully with the rest of that room, and they're all growing. They're young. They're all growing, and they've got a coach there in Granado who's great at handling young personalities when they work together.
Yeah, but starting
it's really a nice situation to have going. And I'm watching them last night. Why I say they were a playoff team? I mean, they gave a Devils team that was really going for it. Devils were playing that game like it was a big game.
Oh, it was a big game. They have a chance to win.
The first 2 periods of that game they were right there with them. And the night before, they take out the Rangers. It's the Rangers were trying to win too.
This is the thing. I love what the Sabres are doing. I love the young core group. They're very close, but they're things that I think everybody sees that they need to address. Now, they will get better defensively as they get older. They gave up 295 goals against this year. It's got to come down at least 50 or 60 goals for them to make the playoffs. They need more They need more quality goaltending, and I think they need 1 to 2 defensemen. And if they get that, and it's not impossible because they're not overloaded with a lot of term on their contracts, they can be a playoff team, but they need to address those needs.
Yeah. I mean, you go look Carter Hart's year 22 year, and it wasn't good. Now, he had 2 years of NHL experience before that because he came in really early. When you start, like Kevin said, and I've spoken to goalies about this, when you start a season flat-footed, it's completely different than coming in like he's coming in now, coming in hot.
Can we talk about a couple of the games last night, because that Wild Jets games was wild. And apparently there was a bit of retribution in play there, because they were the ones who took out Kaprizov a few weeks back. And Minnesota put out Ryan Reeves, and Ryan Hartman hit Ehlers, and there's going to be a review. Now, this is the thing: you wanted to do some retribution, fine. But if Ryan Hartman, who's a key player for Minnesota, gets suspended for 2 or 3 games, and they're missing out him at the beginning of the playoffs, and that was absolutely dumb. But I do love the emotion of, and I don't think they're going to play each other, but the emotion of 2 division rivals going at it like that.
Oh yeah. No, I mean, I thought, there was definitely the Wild they came out pissed off. They really did. But they also, they kind of, I don't know, they let it get away from them a little bit. I was a little upset with it because honestly, that was a big game for them. Like, they are still in the race of trying to get, they're still right in there too. And they kind of just threw away 2 points in my mind. I mean, getting retribution, sure, fine, but I don't know. I thought they had a chance at, home ice or doing something, doing something there, and they just didn't.
Yeah, they totally punted on having any shot at home ice in that game. Yeah. I only caught the third period of that one. Obviously, I was watching the Sabres, but that third period seemed to be where all the action seemed to happen. And boy, the officiating let it all go. Like they were like, no, you guys will sort it out. You'll sort it out. And then it got really nasty. And then they're like, all right. We'll finally start doing something. It happened in the Toronto game too, I believe, Mike, with them and the Lightning. Like it. Well, I get it. Like, you gotta be able to know the temperature of the game before it gets to that point. And that's a couple of bad slip ups ahead of the playoffs.
Yeah, the referees tried to do what they normally do, Kev, and they, like if there was a scrum and things were going on, they'd pick one guy out and that thinking that would stop it. But of course, that was not the methodology of the Tampa Bay Lightning. As I predicted, I knew that Tampa Bay was going to, and thankfully the Leafs, maybe they listened to me. I don't think so, but they sat Marner, Matthews, and Giordano. They sat Samsonov, and they ended up only playing 11 forwards and 6 defensemen. But Tampa Bay went at them physically. Maroon was trying to egg on Bunting. Luke Shen dropped the gloves and beat the crap out of him. Corey Perry started his stuff, but every scrum there was something going on, and all the referees kept doing was picking out one guy, and they gave the Tampa Bay 8 power plays, and I think the Leafs 6 it didn't stop them because that was not what was going on. What was going on is this was message sending in game 81 for two teams that have been targeting each other for the last 2 months. And I have to give the Leafs credit. Shorthanded, without their two best players, without their number one goaltender, and with a young goaltender like Joseph Woll, they pushed back. I think they stood up to Tampa Bay. And if anybody inflicted pain, it was the Leafs on the Lightning. So I'm not ready to pick the Leafs over the Lightning. I still pick Tampa Bay, but this is the best Leaf team we've seen in about 6 or 7 years.
Kevin, I had a thought for you here, a question, because you're always the one who says, it doesn't matter. Tampa can, pick it up at any time they want to. Can they?
Yeah. I don't. They may be, at the end of the road here, but the last year they were terrible and they ended up playing well, but this time it looks like they can't get there. That's the thing that
It's feels different, doesn't it? It feels different.
Yeah, it does. And sooner or later, it's the same thing with players. Like, the problem is, when a guy's been a really good playoff player, you always think, well, he'll get there for the playoffs, but at some point he doesn't. And the same is true on teams. Like, is this the year that it falls off? What worries me is you look at that defense and you look at the personnel. Yeah. And you go like, wow, like, they still got Hedman. But they're trying to do it with mirrors back there now.
It's funny, Kev, because over the last few years, Tampa has been doing with Hedman what Detroit did with Lidstrom. They played Brett Lebda with Lidstrom, and it didn't hurt them because Lidstrom was so great. He could play with an average to below average defenseman, and you can get away with it. Chris Pronger in Philadelphia played with Carl. Okay, fine. He's so great that he can cover up for him. Hedman had been playing with Jan Ruta the last few years. Ruta's an average defenseman. They're playing with Darren Radish right now. And, Darren Radish, Russ, is barely an NHL defenseman.
Oh, I know. I remember him.
You can't get away with that. So, they've got Cole, they've got Sergachev, they got Cernak, but they're not as deep on the blue line. They were trying to get a defenseman at the deadline, and they couldn't.
Those three, though, they're going to ride those three for massive minutes. They're going to be as dirty as can be, and they're not going to try and play a skill series against the Leafs. They're not even interested in that.
No,
they're hoping their goalie stands on his head. And they're going to be as dirty. They're going to be the dirtiest team in the playoffs.
They're going to try to sewer them every chance they get, and
they're just trying to aggravate Mike. And if they can get him aggravated, look at. I'll write through these photos. I can see Mike's blood pressure rise.
Oh yeah. You can see it going up.
But Russ is absolutely right. Like, I always talk about, it's never ever one sided. It's never. Like, you can't always say a team's going to win. Usually what you're talking about is a probability. Like they could win. Tampa Bay. Like at the start of the year, I would have thought Toronto and Tampa Bay would be each team. If you played 10 times, would win 5. But I think we've reached the point now where Tampa Bay can still beat Toronto, but it would probably be only twice if they played 10 times.
Yeah, I read that's dead on.
Yeah, because Toronto is so skilled now, and they're trying to do it with tactics that they're not all that comfortable playing, they being Tampa. They're going to, as Mike said, they're going to, play a much tougher game. You can see that's what they planned to do as soon as they made that trade with Nashville.
Yeah.
So I don't know. And they still have Vasilevsky, so that gives them a chance to win a series.
Yeah. Well,
but
here's the projected final standings from the BuzzStream, which again, is still at 62.5% on the season, still killing it. And it was pretty close. We talked about this, Joe, about how I said Buffalo could get close last time you were on, and I don't know, but they did. They sure did. Actually, yesterday, BuzzStream had
the point total you had them at. It was like 90.
It's right here. It says 89.
89 now. Okay.
Yeah, 89. It was at 93, and that put them in the playoffs. They were in the playoffs, and even before yesterday's game, which I had them winning last night, it had them in the playoffs. All right, so here we go. The Carolina, this Carolina, New Jersey, 1 point separates them now. Carolina beats Florida in this scenario, gets the 2 points. New Jersey loses their game. The Rangers win their game, but still, of course, the Rangers can't catch the Devils. So that's your middle ground right there. So here's your initial. But the crazy thing is this right here. The 5 point difference right now is 4 points between Tampa Bay. Right now it's 4 points between Tampa Bay and Florida, right? So is that right? Yeah, 96 to 92 right now. Now you want to hear it's 6. Okay. So this is Tampa winning their last game and Florida losing their last game. So that gives them another choice. But there's only 6 points difference between the Florida teams is incredible. Like based on where we were this year, that Florida made up that much ground on Tampa.
Well, Tampa is under 500 since the deadline.
Yeah,
I mean,
sure.
We weren't even paying attention that much, but Florida lost some games in the past few weeks that they really shouldn't have lost. A couple times they just got beaten in weird games. They lost in Philly, like they lost. But I mean, they could have caught Tampa, which is astonishing. They really could.
It's funny, like the Florida thing to me is Bobrovsky playing so bad for the first 2.5 months of the season, and then Spencer Knight running into his problems, and I mean, hopefully he's recovering well from that. But I mean, they had no goaltending whatsoever. Like they got little to no goaltending, and then Bobrovsky woke up and he was pretty great
again,
the rest of the way. And then he gets sick recently, and then Alex Lyon steps up and just shuts the door for him. Like,
now they're riding the hot hand here, Joe. I mean, apparently Bobrovsky is healthy enough now, but Lyon has played so fantastic. I mean, is this a Hamburglar situation where they're going to ride Lyon into the playoffs?
Yeah, it does. It feels like the hamburger. It also feels like what Doobie Doobie Doo. Remember him? Dubekowitz, right?
Wayne Dublovitz?
Wade Dublovitz. It feels like him too. Like where he came on the end of the season and got the Islanders in the playoffs one year.
Or the Moose, Johan Head.
But the minute Lyon loses, he's out. Like if Bob is healthy, he'll be done.
That's what happened with Hammond. He lost game 1 against Montreal, and then they played Anderson. So
and that's what's going to happen here. But here's the question, though. Raise your hand if you think anything close to what you're seeing now is going to be the same hockey in the playoffs, because we know this whole league will completely change over, and as soon as this regular season ends, and it's going to look completely different. The refs are going to call things completely different. Like what we're seeing and talking about now, like 20% of it will translate over. That's it.
I'll tell you this. If there's a team that wants to manipulate what's going to go on in their last game, it's going to be the LA Kings, because if they lose, and they're at 102 right now, and Seattle's at 100, and if Seattle wins, then Seattle plays the Oilers, and the Kings play Colorado, maybe Dallas, whoever wins. I don't know. I mean, I think I would probably rather play the winner of the Central than play Edmonton the way they've been going.
Now Dallas's last 2 games are against
Vegas doesn't have the Pacific locked down yet either.
No, it's tied right now. They're tied.
I just said the Oilers are good. I think in a
round. This is the projected standings. Don't get this off the screen, press. But this is the projected standings here. So this has Dallas's last 2 games are against St. Louis. It has the buzz. John has them losing both, which is really bizarre, being that Dallas has a chance to do this. But there's a history with Dallas and St. Louis, and I think you can throw it out the window because of the importance of this game. But I have to go with what it's saying. So it's going to say that if I would predict this, Dallas is not going to lose both those games to St. Louis. But this happens, then Colorado does take it pretty easily, and Las Vegas does take will move ahead of Edmonton, setting up the Edmonton LA.
But Kev, right now there is a pall hanging over the Avalanche, because it doesn't sound like Landeskog is going to be ready to play at the start of the playoffs. He's just sitting around. Makar has been out the last few games. They think he's going to play, but he's not 100%. And those are 2 pretty key players. I mean, I think their goaltending is better than it was last year, but I mean, this is not the juggernaut that we saw going into the playoffs last season.
I don't know. I mean, they just won 5 in a row.
I remember, so often I've brought up the fact that if you listen to coaches, they actually most of the time tell the truth. And Bednar, when Landeskog started skating, sounded alarm bells. Like I have never seen someone just say, he basically said, we are concerned about his long-term health and where he's going to be as a hockey player. This is when he just started skating. I think Colorado has known for a long time that there was issues here, and that it wasn't going. This is not a standard. He'll be out, 4 to 6 weeks or 4 to 6 months, and then he'll be back and be normal. I think they've suspected there were going to be issues. So I think they've been planning for this. But, that's a big loss. They've crept up now. They're middle of the pack as an offensive team. But, to see that Colorado team in the 20s for their goal scoring this season for as long as they were, that it's just hard to take. So, that's tough. It's a tough loss for them.
But Joe, I mean, you're right. They are in playoff mode now. They're 8-1-1 in their last 10. So, they're a veteran team. They're a really quality team. So, they're in that direction. I'm just saying, they were weakened from the Kadri loss in free agency. I think they're a good team and they have a ton of talent, but they're not as strong as they were last year. And Dallas, they've been really hot going into the playoffs. So those are two teams that could come out of the West.
Yeah, I don't know, and I haven't watched a ton of Avs, and their schedule is a little bit soft recently. I mean, the last 20 games or so, it's been pretty soft, but still got to win the games. They won 15 of the last 19. So I mean. They're a team that has so much talent. They've got so many guys that can beat you. And Mikko Rantanen is on a completely other level this season. He's ridiculous, and McKinnon's been so damn good all season. And I don't know. I think they can survive without Makar the first round, maybe even 2 rounds, honestly. But long term, that's tough. But if all they have to do is navigate maybe a few games of the first round without Makar, they'll be fine.
I'm going to read you a stat. This is a stat from Big Head Hockey on the Twitter. So, most points by a defenseman through 238 games in NHL history. Cale Makar, 246. Bobby Orr, 233. They need Cale Makar as much as
yes.
In my estimation, it's going to be really hard.
They need him big time. They need him to be Cale Makar from last year too. They can't just. It has to be healthy and going.
I know there's a lot of talk right now about the whole LTIR situation, Kev. You have Mark Stone miraculously coming back around game 75, or he's skating now. He's going to be back for the playoffs. We didn't know that wasn't going to happen. There was a lot of LTIR stuff regarding the Leafs with them not being able to play a goaltender because they deemed that it wasn't an emergency situation. But then in the second of back-to-back games, they said, "Oh, okay." So it's sort of arbitrary by the NHL how they decided what was a valid emergency exception or not. Russ and I were talking about this. This is something that is probably going to have to be addressed or will be addressed at the next Board of Governors meeting, because a lot of teams are pissed off that teams are pulling a Kucherov and bringing players back after the regular season. But that's the CBA. You can't really do anything about that unless you're prepared to change the CBA.
Kevin, you got that? Of course, I'll respond to Kevin for a second. But no, I agree with you, Mike. And what's funny? I talked to some people who were at the Board of Governors meetings, the GM meetings that just happened in Florida. And I said, did you guys get into this? Did you guys get into the LTIR thing? Because I've been a long proponent that something's got to change on it. It's too easy to fake your way through it. And they said the topic was not even brought up or on the agenda. Right. So what does that mean? Kevin, you back?
I am.
Okay, yeah, we lost you for a second there. So did you hear what Mike was asking you there?
My long
No, I didn't. I kind of
talking about the LTIR situation.
Okay, I'll be brief. Surmising. I said Mark Stone coming back on LTIR after being out for a long time with a back injury. There are teams that are pissed off about it. The Leafs with their goaltending situation with the emergency exception. One game they said, no, it's not valid. Then the next day when they're playing the second of back-to-back games, and they're threatening to play a 20-year-old OHL goalie who had 4.5 goals against, then all of a sudden the exception is valid. It just seemed arbitrary, and I wonder if this is going to get addressed.
Yeah, and there's something else floating around out there that no one's paying attention to that feeds into that. The Detroit Red Wings have had Nedeljkovic up on emergency recall. Mm-hmm. Now, obviously, Husso was playing, so they reassigned him to Grand Rapids, but they kept him in Detroit. He's been practicing with the team and everything else. They took him on the road,
right?
And then when they got to Carolina, they said, well, I guess it's a flare-up or whatever, so we're calling him back up on emergency recall, but he's been with the team ever since. And then they just plugged him in yesterday and he played. And when I've asked about it, people have said, well, the difference is the Red Wings have plenty of cap space, and this is not a cap avoidance issue.
Right.
This is a legitimate concern about the injury. But, it does smell right. Like they've really sort of made a mockery of the emergency recall.
That's normal. Like you
Here's what's funny about that. Like and Rush knows too. So the Flyers and Phantoms practice in the same facility sometimes. At points, and there's a 2-ring facility. There's a locker room for each of them, right? And I've seen situations where they've sent guys to the Phantoms practice to save cap money.
Yeah, just go on that sheet.
One practice
on that sheet.
The most ridiculous thing I've ever seen. They just it's crazy. Just
it's the daily accrual. You can send them down and bring them back up. But to your point, Kev, the Leafs had Joseph Wall with them, even though he was in the minors. Technically, Matt Murray was back in Toronto because he has a head injury. And for the last 2 games before yesterday, they had an AHL or an ATO goaltender being the backup, because they didn't have enough room against the cap. And everybody's like slamming Kyle Dubas. I mean, how dare you do?
Well, he's pushed it to a very far degree here, Mike. And I do think at the draft the GMs are going to be talking about this, and I do think the owners are going to be talking about this. It wouldn't shock me at some point as if they do start to change it, because
they don't want to change this. Like I said, I talked to people at the GM meetings. They didn't even bring it up. It wasn't on the agenda. The LTIR thing.
I know, but now I kind of wonder, because we did hear rumblings that a couple are mad already about the way this is sort of being handled, and so I do kind of wonder now. It's getting close, I think, to reaching its end point. And now it's just gotten to be like the NFL when the 49ers used to just circumvent it, like the cap, like it wasn't there.
Isn't this a CBA issue?
It is. CBA.
Yeah, I don't think they can do anything about it without negotiating something. Yeah, without the players.
They have talked about it.
And both sides agree they could.
Yeah,
they could amend it.
Yeah,
they could amend the CBA by doing it.
But you have to have an agreement on both sides, and I
think they
historically nobody gives up anything without getting.
I think why they're not doing it is I think this is something that in their heads benefits both the owners and the players. And that's why there's no reason they would change it. It doesn't benefit team versus team, because some teams can do it. Some teams are in different spots cap wise. But as far as the owners go, they can make their team better with players get more players, get more money.
Either an e-bug is going to start a game, or a team's going to have 10 forwards, and there's going to be an outcry at some point, maybe even for the fans saying we're not watching NHL hockey anymore.
But Russ, we came that close to that yesterday. I mean, the Leafs went 11-6 because they couldn't call up Wayne Simmons, and they were going to start this emergency. The ATL goalie, who was a 20-year-old who played for Windsor this year, they were going to play him, and then only then did the NHL give the emergency exception.
I mean, and it's funny because in the preseason, there's a rule as to what constitutes a lineup and what you could have in there or not. But in the regular season, there isn't.
Yeah, was the emergency that that was a meaningless game so we could allow Wall to play, whereas before you forced the Leafs to play Samsonov again against Florida because Florida was in the playoff race? I mean, it just seemed very arbitrary.
Convenient, yeah.
It just seemed very arbitrary.
So a friend of mine who's a Penguins fan today and a friend of mine who's a Flyers fan today texted me similar things from a different angle, which was really funny. Penguins fan said, "Oh man, that was a terrible loss, but at least we may have a shot at Connor Bedard now." And then my my Flyers fan is like, "It's about time, for the Penguins to once again get just happen into some franchise player. The Crosby's getting up there. When Lemieux got up there, now it's Crosby. Now Connor Bedard.
You're not going to get Connor Bedard.
I don't think so either, but." It is the way they play, with how they played, and I just think that I was unbelievable how this Penguins team, and not to go back on that too much, but
sure. But again, there's a lot of assumptions being made here. You can't even. I'm not even going to assume the Islanders are going to beat the Canadians. I said this 3 or 4 shows ago. No matter what the schedule says late in the season, I've seen enough upsets in my life that I wasn't going to start saying, "Well, this is a lot easier than this, and this is a lot easier than that," because. Like yesterday's show, the Penguins, it was not easy.
And the Penguins might not beat Columbus, and then at the end of the day, the Sabres, if they won yesterday, would have made the playoffs. So there you have it. That's how it plays out, right? So
that's how it is sometimes.
What?
But that's how it is sometimes.
I know. It's nuts. Now, the real interesting thing about the Florida-Carolina game, and I'm going to talk about this before we go, is tomorrow's Florida-Carolina game is interesting on a couple levels. First of all, Florida's in the playoffs. That's great. But they're not going to rest because you don't want to play Boston, right? So you're going to try to stay out of that last spot.
Right.
If they win, they can stay out of that last spot. I think win or tie, they can stay out of that last spot. Something like that. But if they were to beat Carolina, that could also potentially mean that their first round matchup is New Jersey, which is ironic because you think about it, because them beating Carolina could end up catapulting New Jersey, if they win their last game, into the top spot. So Florida, by beating Carolina, might not be able to play Carolina, but playing against Carolina might not be able to play Carolina either way in the playoffs. Is what I'm trying to say. Like if they lose to Carolina, they could play Boston,
right?
And if they beat Carolina, they could play New Jersey. So we're all sitting there looking at right now. They're against Florida and Carolina as a matchup that might be the least likely matchup.
Well, I'd rather play New Jersey than play Boston. I'll tell you that.
Oh, for sure. But you'd rather play Carolina than play New Jersey. So but you can't. There's no way. There's nothing Florida can do. There's nothing Florida can do to control that. I think I'm trying to figure out if they were to lose in overtime, would that actually give Carolina enough? It might actually
with the Rose and all the other.
No,
if you get to overtime, and you're thinking, if you get to overtime, that's a thought. It's got to be a thought.
New Jersey has the advantage in regulation overtime wins. So if they won outright and Carolina only got a point, then New Jersey would win the division.
Okay, all right. If Carolina gets 2 points,
then they win the division. Then they win the division.
And Florida gets 1. That's how Florida ends up playing Carolina. Right?
The only way that happens is if the Islanders lose to Montreal and Pittsburgh beats Columbus.
Okay, but no, the Panthers have the tiebreaker on the Islanders, right?
The Panthers, right now they do by 1 game.
Okay, so it could come by regulation, but it's very possible that the Islanders could win.
Yeah,
and the Panthers could still get the tiebreak on that if they were to get 1 point. It's kind of funny because
it's not going to change the way the Panthers play though, because you don't know until it's like the third period with 2 minutes to go and it's tied that you could even get a game into overtime.
No, but you're going to know because the Islanders played the night before, I think, if I remember right. So the Islanders game is the night before. So the Islanders, you kind of have a little bit of a.
But you can't control getting into overtime. That's the point.
No, but if you get it, I know that. But if you get into overtime,
okay, that's different. That's a different.
You can, and by losing you play Carolina, and by winning you play New Jersey. That's a different.
Right, but now you're talking about the odds of getting a game into overtime.
I know, but I'm just saying, should they get it overtime? Is there any thought in this, Kevin, at all? Like, am I completely?
Yeah, that's a really tough one. I didn't even think about all that, but I mean, no, the idea of throwing a game to get is.
Get the right matchup. Well,
that's reprehensible.
It is reprehensible. But I felt like the Rangers will tell you the Penguins did it a couple years in a row, right?
Well, yeah, they definitely did it 1 year for sure.
They did it 1 year.
There was throwing of games. It should have been last night between Chicago and Pittsburgh because Chicago is aiming to get the best chance at Connor Bedard.
Right.
They got 2 points, and that's probably going to cost them the best odds. I mean, right now
we're talking about a matchup difference between Carolina and Boston. If Florida, when Florida gets to that overtime,
even so, I mean, there's even honor among.
There's honor, I know that, but it's hard to.
But I think we've established there's no way Florida is going to play Carolina. They're going to either play New Jersey or they're going to play Boston.
No, I think there's a way. I think.
Okay, it's like 6,000.
They lost in overtime. I think that's the key. That's what I'm saying, Russ, Mike. If they lost in overtime to Carolina, that gives Carolina 2 points. That puts Carolina ahead of New Jersey, and potentially puts them ahead of the Islanders or the Penguins. So that potentially puts them in the spot where they are. That definitely puts them ahead of the Penguins if they get the 1 point. So, they could potentially. That's the only way you could see them playing Carolina. But I don't know. It's just a weird thing. You get to these things. I love this kind of stuff at the end of the year. This is the kind of stuff that I love looking at because it's just fun. It's like who's going to play who because matchups are so freaking important.
I just find it very interesting that we're at game 80 or game 81 for every team. And right now, the only matchup that is locked in place, which has been locked in place for about 3 months, is Tampa-Toronto.
Yeah,
That's the only one. Every other matchup, we don't know who Boston's going to play. We don't know who's winning the division in the Metro or the Central or the Pacific.
Who wants 1 versus 8 now, Mike? You're pretty happy with that?
I still want it. It's a more fair system.
No, but are you happier with Tampa versus Toronto and the Rangers?
But I have a question for
I think
Kevin before we go here. The question is for you, Kev. So Tony D'Angelo got scratched for his 4th straight game. He talked about it, I guess, this morning about, hey, I want to be here, but if they don't want me, I guess it's a business and whatever. Tortorella won't talk about it. And if he gets scratched for a 5th game, doesn't the coach have to say something to the fan base? Because this guy hasn't played 5 straight NHL games. It would be 5 straight NHL games. Shouldn't he say something to the fans?
You would think he should, but that's the league is changing now. Like, it's amazing to me that we were just talking about this the other day. In my capacity of USA Today, with rare exceptions, if I went in to see a team, I would assume I could talk to the general manager. But how many teams now does the general manager just talk twice a season?
All right, so I'm going to give a situation. I'm not going to say who the GM was, but I was at a game the other night, and it was at the end of the game, and there was a moment where a reporter wanted to talk to the GM, and it was legit because it was a big-time situation. And as quickly as the question came out to the GM, the answer was no, and the GM flew into the locker room.
Yeah, I mean, that's becoming commonplace. And those are kinds of questions, like when a guy doesn't play that long, like in the old days, the GM would discuss that.
Right.
So, and you just can't get into, I mean, there are still GMs to talk, but there's more that now don't talk on a regular basis. So it's just kind of the changing world, and the injury situation is becoming much more difficult to navigate. They're giving you less information. Even in the minor league, I deal with the Red Wings, obviously. In Grand Rapids, Griffins do not say why a player isn't playing. They don't say he's hurt or he's a healthy scratch. You're just left to your own devices. Like, there's a prospect there, and we have no idea why he's not playing.
Well, I mean,
none whatsoever. Yeah, so
I mean, earlier in the season, we had a information come out that Hartford and Bridgeport didn't want reporters to go to cover the games because they weren't giving them access, and they weren't giving them information on players. So it's like, it only goes so far. It's like a closed shop.
But it does hurt the fans and the sport after a while. It does, because fans grow tired of that. Mm-hmm. They have these questions. And some of them are going to tune out. Some of them are going to get tired of it.
I would guess, though, you'll get some answers about D'Angelo at the end of the season, and there'll be you'll get something out of it.
Yeah,
you'll get an answer in June when they buy it.
No, it'll be next Monday. Next Monday.
Just kidding.
Yeah, they won't buy him out.
No, I know. I'm just kidding.
No, they're going to trade him, though. There's no doubt about that.
Can he be traded at this point?
Yes.
Sure.
He can be traded if you eat half his salary. He can be $2.5 million defenseman. Who knows? Carolina might take him back at $2.5 million. That's what they wanted to pay him.
Who wants to deal with it, though?
What a mess.
That's the thing.
I know that's
burns every bridge behind him.
I like, if you have a young team and you trade for that guy, do you really want that distraction in the water?
Well, they're not a young team, and they have.
No. I know Carolina's not, but if like Arizona or Anaheim or something like that, I wouldn't want him around. He's too much of a distraction.
Don't be misled. Like, he had a lot of friends in the New York Ranger locker room, and I'm told in Carolina he had friends as well. Like, it's not that he's not getting along with his teammates. I mean, even though there have been some issues, usually it's tension with his coach.
If he's a $2.5 million defenseman, I think Carolina would take him back. I do.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I think maybe you're right. All right, let's end the show on something we haven't done in a very long time.
Is it the draft simulator?
Yes, NHL Draft Lottery Simulator. Right?
Yeah, all right. Here we go, baby.
For those fans of tanking, here we go.
Tankathon.
The tankathon.com. I'm just going to share the screen. Here we go. So this is thanks to our friends at tankathon.com. They actually are friends. I'm talking to guys. It's pretty cool. All right, here we go. And on we go.
Yeah, just do it. It's okay. We try.
I'm gonna do it. People won't believe me. All right.
I won't.
The rest never believes me. Anyway, here it comes. All right, ready. We are going to run it. Sim the lottery. Now.
There you go.
Here it comes. And the winner is
the
Arizona Coyotes.
I would absolutely hate it.
I mean, it's very small, but it looks like what? Washington's second?
Washington second. that would be Columbus 3rd, Anaheim 4th, Chicago 5th.
Yeah, I would absolutely hate that for the
Montreal
league.
falls all the way to 7, Mike. You'd be happy about that.
Well,
The Ducks one would be the fascinating one because they would be the ones to decide whether they would take Mitchkov or not, and that would be the fascinating one. Everything else would be decided up to that point.
Yeah,
Mitchkov is not going 3rd. There's
a fourth. Go fourth. Easy.
But they have Mitchkov going 3rd.
Well, yeah, but it doesn't matter who they have going. I'm saying
I know.
Well, like I've said, it's already been determined by
nobody's taking Mitchkov in the top 3.
My discussions with God, I've already put an E5 on that Connor Bedard is going to be in Montreal.
Not happening.
And E5 will be that Fantilli is going to be a Philadelphia Flyer. So that's how it's going to play out. Montreal.
Okay, you keep thinking that.
I don't think so. Actually, I think that the Flyers will be drafting either 7th or 9th.
I don't know. When I watch Fantilli, I'm like, that's a Flyer. And then when I see Connor Bedard, that's a Canadian.
Anybody
but Fantilli, that's any team player.
I know. He does.
Coyotes or the Canadians.
But I will tell you, my top 10's changing. It's going to actually change over the weekend because, the playoffs are still going on. There's still the Hlinka. Like, things are not fully settled in the prospect world.
Aside from
Islanders Canadians is tonight, right? So that's a big one. And then you got to check sportsology.com because Russ won't tell us that for free.
It's free on Sportsology. I
want you to go to sportsology.com. So go to sportsology.com.
On this all the time.
I know, but go to. I'm just kidding. Go to sportsology.com. Check out Joe on all of his various places they told you before.
I will tell you this, Joe, just so you know. Fantilli is the favored guy to be second by most teams. There are some teams that would definitely take Carlson, though.
Mm-hmm. I mean, after what happened last year with the draft, nothing can surprise me now.
And the thing is, Carlson's ripping it up in the playoffs. So if there's somebody that says, that's the better guy for us, or they think, hey, we can get him to the NHL a year sooner. Yeah. It's still a factor.
Desperation makes for different calls. That's for sure.
Fantilli lays and a pretty face. Come on, it's coming. It's coming. It's happening.
All right.
Remember how the buzz is just hockey. We will talk to you then.
See you, Baby Yoda.
Later, Mitch.